Welcome everybody. Really exciting topic today. Since many of you are new to the community of practice on scaling up, I just wanted to briefly introduce. We are now a large community started in 2014, basically very focused on donors. And little by little, it started to evolve. The idea of having a common space where we could talk about scaling up. We were all coming from the scaling up space, developing different ways of thinking about it. And little by little, this has grown since 2014. And in 2017, Elena and I were asked to start this group, which is focused on scaling up grassroots social enterprises, sort of from the bottom up. And our group has also been growing organically in a very steady way. So today we are very happy to have Eduardo Gustale with us. Eduardo has been on innovation forever. Since he was in university, this was his topic. I met Eduardo when he was managing the Poverty Stoplight in Paraguay, and I saw how amazingly creative, dynamic, resourceful Eduardo was in really taking a very small project at that time and taking it globally. And so it's almost natural that he was then hired by the UNDP Accelerator Labs, where he actually works on monitoring, experimentation, and learning. And so we have invited Eduardo to share with us what's happening in these accelerator labs. And then we will want to have a conversation about this because it is a lot about scaling up innovations within large organizations like UNDP. So with that, over to you, Eduardo, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Isabel. I'm going to start first sharing my screen just to make sure you see it, please.
Yes, we can see it.
You can see the main slide here?
Yes, the main slide.
Great. Isabel, thank you for the invite. I'm delighted to be here for two reasons. You know, first, I was part of Imago as a student, I would say, benefiting from all that knowledge and insights that led us inside Fundación Paraguaya to really rethink about the way we were thinking about scaling. And as you said, I think pretty successfully, we managed to bring what was then a very solid idea, method, and be able to take it to the world and to many more organizations. And on the other hand, because now at UNDP, you know, we have this huge experiment called the Accelerator Labs that have, you know, so many learning points that being part of this community of practice now could really, you know, especially in this meeting, help us debate, explore, and discuss the way we ourselves are thinking about scaling and what can we learn from the broader development ecosystem, and especially around scaling. So I would give a brief presentation, but for me, most importantly, I would like to hear from you, right? So I'm gonna quickly give an overview of what the Accelerator Lab is and basically how are we thinking scaling until now. So to start, I mean, the main reason I would say why the Accelerator Lab network was created. You know, we're now entering different types of challenges in development, and we're trying to respond to three questions basically. How do we better tackle complex and fast-moving challenges in the development sector? How do we find the most relevant solutions that actually work locally? How do we move away from, you know, top-down interventions and take advantage of, you know, bottom-up grassroots innovations that we know are going on everywhere in the world? And how do we learn, you know, more quickly about what works and what doesn't? So the response to this, among other, of course, innovation ventures inside UNDP. I would say the biggest one in terms of size is this huge experiment called the UNDP Accelerator Labs. It's funny that we talk about scaling, but in a sense, this is an experiment at scale. You usually think about an innovation lab in, a prototype, a very lean effort inside an organization, where you start, for me, at least logically would be, let's start with one country from each of the regional bureaus. No, this was a very provocative, I would say, direct mandate from the administrator in terms of this should be big from the start. And if we're trying to incorporate innovation in the organization, it needs to be, there should be a critical mass. So this started in 1 year, we went from 0 to 91 labs. 91 labs representing 114 countries. So this is a huge experiment at scale. The other important point is, what do we mean by accelerator labs? I mean, when I first heard about this project, I immediately thought accelerator meant something around incubation, something around, accelerating the impact of small ventures or of ventures in development and taking them big, right? But actually, the word accelerator is all about accelerating learning. What the Accelerator Lab intends to do is to accelerate learning inside the organization. And of course, but by accelerating learning, we adapt to change and we're able to fulfill or reach the SDGs faster, right? So a basic, theory of change here is about strengthening capabilities inside the organization. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Accelerate learning and how we work, and then hopefully be able to adapt to change faster and better. So what do I mean with strengthening capabilities? The first part is, what's a basic lab? The MVP of a lab is a very lean 3 people lab embedded inside the country office of UNDP. So the country office is, of course, the frontier line of UNDP. Inside the country office, now we have 3 different people. And this is very horizontal. I mean, there's no head of the lab. There's 3 different heads of, 3 different roles. Heads of solutions mapping. These are usually ethnographers, anthropologists, sociologists that work deeply in the community, kind of identifying solutions, but mostly kind of bridging bottom-up solutions with policy design. The second one are heads of exploration. What they do is they find trends, they identify patterns. They usually are the ones that connect the labs with new, unusual partners at the local level. And then we have heads of experimentation, another core method and role, because they are the ones that lead the portfolio of experiments. And basically what we do is, we try to learn through experimentation, right? And these are not, I mean, of course, it's always challenging, but these are embedded inside the country office. So when we think of the lab, we don't think of only a 3-person team. We think of, each country office that actually has a lab and embedded into the country office. If you think about new capabilities, these are just some numbers. 72% of these lab members are new to the UN system. So these are not only new capabilities, but new actual people to the system. 65% come from somewhere outside the sector, right? So from private sector, from academia, from governments. In total, we have now 270 people, of course, representing 91 labs. A very important number for me as well, 25% or 24% are repatriate. So these are all lab members are nationals, right? They're really embedded into the local context because they're nationals, but 25% of them actually came back to their countries to work for the labs, right? So in the case of Paraguay, we have, an NYU professor coming back to the country to actually work for the Accelerator Lab. And I think this is a huge contribution also to the local ecosystem. So we have people working with, citizen-generated data, a lot of experience with prototyping, ethnographic research, AI, and again, like 200 different skills that now come into the organization, and suddenly mostly all of the country offices have these new skills embedded into into their local capacity. And of course, these are individual labs, but the most important part, and this is kind of our role here with Luisa and Amy, who I see in the call, we're part of a global network, right? It's not only about individual labs, but how do we actually turn that into a learning network in a global perspective. So this is an amazing work done by my colleagues on how to actually create a network out of individual labs. And I'm super surprised. I was super surprised when I came in, just the level of dynamism, diversity of geographies, and how interconnected and how much trust there is among lab members. So typical example, that WhatsApp group is a blast. I mean, they're always talking and they're always sharing insights. You have 300 different messages per day in a typical WhatsApp group of the labs. Ecuador asking about who's working on informality and who has experience on this. They get a response from Ghana 2 minutes after, and then in 10 minutes you see the whole kind of all the continents represented in that answer. So it's kind of knowledge management, not just in case, but just in time, right? And that's very difficult to build. So I think that's definitely a success of these 2 years of the Accelerator Labs. The second one is, accelerate learning. So 2 quick examples here is first the learning cycle, right? So the speed on how the labs operate is super important, because usually development projects have a long, planning time. Then you execute the project, and then by the end, unless you do a kind of a midterm evaluation, by the end you evaluate the results, right? And this is, it can even be a 5-year process. What we try to do with the labs is shorten that cycle from planning to acting and reflecting, and actually it is iterative. And usually a cycle will last around 3 months, from presenting a learning challenge to actually trying to learn from that. And then the other part of the cycle is actually, the actual process, which is very circular. We try to first sense about an emerging issue and really understand. Then you explore what's out there, and you scan the ecosystem and the horizon. We usually then test specific interventions or solutions, and then try to grow them by handing over the portfolio of solutions, or advocate for policy change, or hand over to partners. Because the labs have this short cycle. I mean, they are not in charge of then implementing the projects. It's more of a exploratory phase at the beginning, right? So the question about handover and growth is a very important one. And of course, it's the main part of our conversation today, probably. When we think about adaptation to change, just two quick examples, right? First, we use most of the labs work with the portfolio approach. So when Uganda is tackling deforestation as a main theme, they don't only focus on one solution or try to, scale one solution. They are working at the institutional level with energy audits. They are working at the technological levels with, improving satellite data to actually monitor forest cover, and be able to analyze, an entire area, before it took a year, now it takes a month, right? Or even days. Of course, innovative financing, and at the social cultural level in Uganda, deforestation is a problem because most of the cooking is done using charcoal, right? I think they were even telling that, even the president cooks with charcoal. So it's of course a huge cultural issue, right? The other example of adaptation to change, of course, is COVID. I mean, the fact that the labs were set up before COVID, and then COVID hit, it's amazing the agility and the capacity that country offices had, thanks to the existing of the labs and all these skills that were brought into the organization. I mean, it was the best demonstration of adaptation to change, I would say, last year, if you see how labs in a few days were able to completely shift what they're doing and try to explore this uncertain world that was dropped into us last year, right? I'm gonna move back now to one question that I had when I came in, and of course there's a role called solutions mapping, and the first question that came to mind is, if development is moving away from solutionism, why are we embedding solutions mapping into our practice? I mean, why do we have this idea of looking for solutions if you're moving away from solutionism? So solutions mapping is very interesting. I mean, it's not new, but I don't know of any organization that has 91 full-time people just looking out for grassroots solutions in their local communities, and it's amazing what they're finding. I mean, we have I think now that number is updated, we have almost 2,000 solutions being mapped all around the world, right? Solutions that have, of course, different scales, different uses. Some of them are not scalable. Some of them, are very, very contextualized, etc. And the thing here, when we do solutions mapping, it's not about, identifying solutions and trying to bring them to scale. I mean, that's not at the core of the Accelerator Labs. So what do we do? We try to amplify solutions by, inspiring innovation policy advocacy. We try to learn. I mean, every solution that's out there is a result of a need that exists in the community. So we're trying to learn not only from the solution as a solution, but also trying to understand what is that solution telling us about a need. So there's a lot of informing or adapting UNDP program design by finding the patterns around solutions mapping. We of course try to stimulate new research agenda, or just help the ecosystem of grassroots innovators see themselves or collaborate between each other. And this is not only at a local context, but also at an international one, at a global one. And of course, some of the solutions are interesting and they get tested, or they form part of a wider portfolio of experiments, and some of them might reach scale, right? What do we mean by scaling? What do we mean by growing? So we use this, three different approaches to scaling, and of course there are more, and this is still dynamic for us. We don't only think about scaling out in numbers, and there are different stakeholders that of course think the Accelerator Labs of as a way of finding the next huge thing in development, the next big thing going on, from finding it in a local community, and how can we actually replicate that in huge amounts of numbers. Then we have the scaling up, which involves institutional change and policy changes to further the actual innovation, and scaling deep, which is impacting culture through altering behaviors and norms at a cultural level. So just examples here in general, scaling out, of course, increasing the geographical coverage of your project. Scaling up is, just managing to change a data policy to actually recognize that, in my case, poverty is not only about income, it's multidimensional, right? So, or scaling deep is just changing the way we allocate resources based on the decisions that are made. So quick examples here of what we can find in the network. Scaling out, this was a game, COVID game, just aimed at youth. It started in India, and it scaled out, I think, to 5 or 6 different countries in that lab network, reaching hundreds of thousands of people that actually managed to play the game and benefit, from the impact. So it was something that started in India, and in a couple of months, it was present in many countries in the region. The second, scaling up, in Philippines, they've managed to incorporate the methods of the labs and actually influence the national innovation policy in Philippines, right? So the Accelerator Lab is literally, helping write and move forward the innovation policy in the country, and they are incorporating a lot of new data sources, new methods into that policy. And scaling deep, I had to include Paraguay. They are working to really understand what are the roots of informality in the construction sector, right? So based on their work and their experiments, they're finding out what we could change at at a policy level in how to really influence better decision making in informality, right? So they set up a series of experiments, and now they're working with the ministry to actually change some basic policies that could hopefully decrease informality in this sector. And also, you know, it's very interesting how they're working with the entire ecosystem around the sector, right? Construction companies, ministry, informal workers, etc. And just a final reflection on, you know, this is of course an emerging practice, and what are we learning about scaling is that it takes an ecosystem to scale. I mean, the labs are there because we are connecting to innovators. We are trying to influence government policy, local governments. It's not about a single solution. We're trying to embed this into a portfolio that layers different interventions, and of course partnerships. I mean, one of the things that really surprises me about the labs is the amount of unusual partners they bring to the table, right? So this is about expanding partnerships, the type of partnerships as well. And of course, what does it mean to hand over your work so that someone else can continue? So this is my quick introduction, Isabel. Again, I'm super eager to help you, to hear from you, and to exchange some words, and of course learn from the work of the colleagues in the call.
Very good. Thank you, Edu. Do you want to stop sharing or? Yeah, very good. Wonderful. Thank you. Well, it must be a lot of fun to work in the UNDP Accelerator Labs. And I have a question. So there are many large organizations like UNDP who are trying to do similar, not exactly the same, but similar approaches to innovation. To have sort of innovation spaces that eventually help innovate within that organization. And it's so difficult to innovate in large organizations. So the IDB has the iLabs, the World Bank used to have the development marketplace. And now you have this, and also with the UNDP head, Akim, very much driving this and believing in this. So my question is, it's very difficult in an organization that has been around for many, many years to bring in innovation. Yet the big prize, of course, is if these innovations can reach scale through affecting and mainstreaming some of this fresh air into the way that UNDP does business. So any thoughts about how that has happened? What are the challenges? That would be very useful for all of us to hear.
Super. So I'm actually, if I may just share again my screen, because I had some, you know, we just went through a midterm evaluation, and we're seeing some signals that I think are important to share, because it speaks about, you know, this mainstreaming idea. In general, Isabel, I think one of the very clever moves here is the size of this experiment. I mean, there's no doubt that this is, although it is a temporary kind of experiment and project, it's aimed at, you know, it's a shots of steroids in the organization, and hopefully it lasts, right? So the question now is, you know, how can we take the Accelerator Labs as a temporary effort and turn it into the kind of a permanent R&D function in the organization? Some things that we're seeing, and I'm gonna just tell you about some of the signals after 2 years of working at the Accelerator Lab at this scale is, of course, we're seeing new ways of working. We are trying to influence government priorities. We're testing the organizational readiness for innovation. We have seen at Agile, you know, and testing a lot with experiments and Agile mindsets. The mutual trust and support inside the labs, inside that network is incredible. So the potential we're seeing in the organization, and this is still a question, but it's very interesting because we're seeing the signals, is how does it actually turn into, doing development different? How are we helping governments be or make part of the shift, ceding power, and hopefully creating a more horizontal organization? And then finally, to this last point, because I don't want to go one-on-one on each of these signals, is how can we, take this temporary lab network, which is already enabled, and turn it into a permanent R&D function. One of my maybe personal reflections here in terms of mainstreaming or what is the response from the organization, what we found is, definitely labs that have country offices with leadership that have worked with innovation in the past, find themselves in a more enabling environment and are able to mature much faster. It's not a matter of performance. I think it's a matter of maturity. And of course, that's very obvious when you compare one lab towards the other. So, yeah.
Leadership really matters. Local leadership also really matters.
Indeed.
Yes. Very good. So could we stop sharing?
Yes.
Edu? It's one of the most difficult things to do, and that's where leadership is so important. Also, expert mode of the fact that we in international organizations know exactly what needs to be done. No, we don't. And there's this huge, rich innovation happening outside on that. So I think that's a sort of the mental shift, which is the most difficult one for a system to change, but the most important, that takes time. You've only been around for 2 years. It takes a long time. So I wanted to ask Elaine, and then I'm going to go to Maria, who has raised her hand. But Elaine, this sounds really exciting, and it reminds me of the development marketplace that you and I both worked together on. And we had amazing innovations, and it was so frustrating to see the resistance within the organization and the lack of success on the objective of the development marketplace, which was this innovation. So we hear from you, Elaine, because you've done a lot of thinking and research and surveys and trying different things. Does this resonate with you? And what are the challenges that you face, and how did you overcome? That might be useful for the team from UNDP to learn a bit from our own mistakes, but also huge.
So Isabel, thank you very much. Eduardo, thank you very much for the presentation. I found it truly fascinating, and I think it provides, it's actually a very interesting contrast to what we did in development marketplace towards what you're doing. So in the development marketplace, what we did was we had competitions, and we had in-country competitions where we would kind of surface really innovative social enterprises or innovations, and then we would just give them money, right? And say, here's the money, go and scale. And what I like about the UNDP Accelerator, it's actually more about knowledge, it seems. It's like, and we didn't have WhatsApp back then for the development marketplace. But I think one of the things that I've realized a lot is that entrepreneurs actually learn a lot more from other entrepreneurs than they do from anyone else. And so your WhatsApp group that you talk about, I've seen similar things with the climate innovation centers that we had in the Caribbean, as well as similar to UNDP, we had a bunch of climate innovation centers, which were basically incubators for clean technology. And they also communicated with each other. Not as efficiently, I think, as the UN Accelerator Lab is, but it was a great way for them to share information. And I think sharing that information has really kind of helped flesh out, point out resources, because it's hard to concentrate knowledge or depend on knowledge within one center, because people are limited, they only know so much. But the more you can kind of expand this kind of network and have more resource and touch points, I think I see that has a lot more benefits to it. And I think with development marketplace, we had great innovations, there was great results that could happen from it. But within the World Bank, it was a very difficult process to kind of incorporate those kind of innovations, even though we knew what the results could be. And I think part of it is, this comes from a private sector angle. Sometimes the government is very resistant to give funding to private sector enterprises. And so that was a little bit of a challenge there too. So then it's like, well, what other ways can we kind of help these enterprises kind of scale up without having that kind of government sensitivity to giving money into the private sector, especially if it's just to make them grow, right? Because why does it why give it to one enterprise versus another enterprise? And so there's a lot of political sensitivity to it. But I think what's interesting with the UNDP is there doesn't seem to be, the government is more on the policy side, right? So it's the engagement with the government in terms of, okay, what are the policy changes that need to happen to make the adoption of these type of innovations happen more easily. And I think this is also, so I feel like if we were still doing development marketplace, we would learn a lot from the UNDP process too, because it is about kind of keeping the government, helping create that enabling environment for these innovations to actually take place and to scale up. So I had a lot of questions actually on the Accelerator Labs, because I think besides, are you also providing financial support to these innovations, or it's just really more kind of policy support as well as just that network that you're providing? I'd be a little bit more curious to see exactly how you go about when someone has an innovation, you realize they have a good innovation. What are you doing to help support the growth of that innovation?
Great question. Good. So I'm going to take a few questions. Maria Boa had her hand up. Maria.
Hello, everyone. Apologies, my camera. I'm not turning on my camera. I'm having issues with it. Hi, Eduardo. Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Boa. I work for the International Mason With Improvement Center. And I was very happy to hear you, Eduardo, and many of your inputs were ringing the bell in our own work at CIMMYT. And especially my question is, when you say, what do we mean by scaling? You were presenting the scaling out, scaling up, the scaling deep. And yeah, I also I know very well retail, but do you take them complementary, or how is the UNDP Labs? You say, okay, this is maybe a scaling pathway for scaling deep, or yeah, it's more like a question if you take it complementary or different pathways. And then my second question is also by your inputs and this amazing idea of connecting the dots of what is already happening. It reminds me the work of Seeds of Good Anthropocene. I don't know if you have heard about them and if you have connected with them. They are also doing some very nice action research on, okay, what is already happening that can really provide solutions that are working in the world. And this is with the Stockholm Resilience Center. Yeah, we'd like to know more of ideas around that. Over. Thank you so much.
Great. Eduardo, we have 2 more questions in the chat, and I invite anybody who wants to have a question also. The chat is available. Do you want to take these 2, or should we take the 4? Edu?
I'll start with the first 2, if that's okay.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
So Elaine, I think you were asking, how do we actually support entrepreneurs, or if we actually, support them. The first, I mean, two quick thoughts there. The first one is the labs don't have, they have very limited resources as a project. They have, approximately $100,000, I think, per year to spend on their different activities. So they don't have the resources to actually go ahead and give that to specific entrepreneurs to scale the ventures. If they do that, or the way they do that is usually through partnerships, right? So I know the case in Paraguay where they, are working with the National Innovation Office and organizing or helping, them organize those competitions that end up supporting entrepreneurs. In general, I think that's a good thing, in the sense that labs are not about resources, are not about giving out resources. They are more about, finding different ways or finding existing resources at their local context that could help them either scale what they are experimenting with or scale the support to specific entrepreneurs. And then the other thing is to be super clear is we don't have any control, or what the labs are working on has nothing, it's super decentralized, it's super distributed. I mean, they decide what they work on based on their country office, operations. So I think that's important for the next questions as well. So quickly responding, again, just summarizing, Elaine, there's no specific support that is giving to entrepreneurs. If that support comes, or if they decide to move forward with any type of financial or resource support, they do it through other partnerships, either in the country office or local partners like governments or private sector organizations. To the point about the kind of administrative systems, it is very difficult for UNDP to give out small grants to entrepreneurs. I mean, the way procurement works makes it very difficult for a lab to actually go through a procurement process to give out seed capital to an entrepreneur. So that's something that came back as a response, and I think UNDP is working hard to try to update the administrative systems to reflect this new way of working as well. Because if we say we want to work with grassroots organizations and with even informal organizations, then what does that mean for the entire administrative process that needs to respond to that need?
So that would be a huge impact, having procurement reforms that allow for governments to use UNDP funds or UN funds so that social entrepreneurs can apply would be a big impact. Yeah.
Definitely. So I was talking about a 3 months process in the learning challenge. Sometimes it takes 4 or 5 months for a procurement process, right? So there's an imbalance there. And if we say we need to be agile, it needs to be in the entire organization as well. So that's one of the examples, right, of changes that we are that I think are being triggered by this work. The other, I think, Maria, your question about what do we mean by scaling, I think these are definitely they're not exclusive. It's not one or the other. We see, and hopefully we will see all three scaling, types of scaling at the same time. I think that's just an initial thought process that we're starting, because when we first think about scaling, it's usually, scaling out. This was actually a work we did with Columbia, with SIPA students, around how can we actually rethink our scaling framework. And there's now a more clear articulation of what we mean by scaling. But I would say, responding to your question, no, we don't think as one or the other. There are many cases where the three of them happen together. But at the same time, we're really still learning about what scaling means for the Accelerator Lab network.
Great. So we have 3 questions in the chat. The first one is, thank you for an incredible presentation. What does check and balances of the lab staff personnel biases and assumptions look like when you're working with local communities? So do you have any checks and balances for that? The second one, how will you decide on the unique 3-person staffing model for each lab, since they are not very common roles, and who helps facilitate the networking across labs? And the third question is why there is a need to identify and document best practice or solutions when there's already a shift towards distributing the ability to solve. Doesn't that fuel external dependency?
Super. I'll start with the second one. I think it's the easier one to respond. First, the titles actually really helped. I mean, just hearing about these titles that are, very different to the usual ones that you would see being published at the UNDP website or in general. I mean, heads of solutions mapping, heads of experimentation really caught the attention. And I think that as a result, we have many people that weren't part of the UN system. So redefining the TORs in a creative way, in an attractive way was I mean, a very intelligent move in terms of attracting a different type of capacity or skill into the organization. The second one, well, these are people the lab members are at an NOB level, so they are very closely working with a country representative, right? So they are middle management up in terms of pay grade, but also relationship to senior management. So I think that also helps in terms of bringing in people with a vast experience and also being able to influence the country level because of the way they're embedded in the country office. The question around who facilitates networking across lab, we have a bunch of we are, I think now 13 people at the global team. We have a lead designer called Bas Lars, former Nesta designer as well. We have Gina Lucarelli and other colleagues that were instrumental in forming or in curating this network. I mean, if the level of trust and the level of dynamism inside the network is just, I mean, for me, even coming from the outside, it's super surprising how we managed to build that in such a short period of time. And I would say that has to do with that uniqueness of the role, the fact that you have, of course, common roles throughout different countries, but none of them is possible if you don't build trust. That trust, I would say, first started on one-on-one boot camps that were done in person in different parts of the world. I think definitely that's where a lot of the cohesion and social capital between us and was built. But then the pandemic hit, and all the trainings. I mean, the second half of labs was brought on board during the pandemic, so it was all done digitally in Zoom boot camps. And the fact that they were able to incorporate themselves into the network, only not knowing each other, was or is pretty amazing. So I think there's a huge responsibility and accomplishment then from my colleagues at a global team who managed to build this network across 91 countries.
Okay, what about the question about accountability, checks and balances for personal assumptions or biases of the staff at the front line?
Well, that's a good one. I mean, it's hard for me to respond specifically because there's always personal biases and assumptions. I mean, the fact that the diversity of expertise and also where each lab member is coming from, I think provides, and the fact that this is very horizontal. I mean, there's no head of lab between the three of them. That provides a very unique, I think, check and balances in any type of work, because between them they adjust in a way because of the way they view the world, because one is an ethnographer, the other one is a data scientist, and the other one might be come from the business sector. So that's a check and balance in itself, from the way they view the world in one sense, but also from an expertise perspective, like from the skills they bring to the table. The second check and balance, I mean, it's incredible how the lab network interacts with each other. I mean, the fact that it's so open, so horizontal, that someone puts, like, I'm just coming from a learning session with 6 different labs from across the world, and we're trying to formulate our learning questions, because we have something called the learning questions, where we're trying to learn more about informality, and everyone brings their perspective to the table, and it's pretty horizontal in the way we think about the work. And that check and balances, even in the WhatsApp group, it's funny how it happens, right? Someone points out to a comment, and then they immediately get a response that might, they might not be in favor of what they're saying.
That's part of building that trusting space as well, no? Yeah.
And that's only possible because of the trust that exists.
Yeah, yeah. What about the question about distributing the ability to solve versus best practices? Doesn't that fuel external dependencies? So it's quite a different mindset, no? Best practices to ability to solve.
Yes, indeed. I mean, when I showed that slide around why we do solutions mapping, I mean, we don't do solutions mapping just to identify a specific solution that we want to scale. I mean, there are many things that come out of that beyond just, this works, let's do more of this. I think the most interesting one comes from really understanding the needs. So wherever there is a grassroots, an innovator doing something, innovating or solving a problem that, probably is not being solved by the government, or it's very unique to a contextual need they have, we're learning a lot about what's going on, right? So instead of the approach is, I would say, instead of tackling a problem based on what you think is better, we're first understanding what's going on in the local context. In some cases, it's about finding what already works. In others, it's around just understanding what's out there so that we can learn more about the issue, right? The other, I would say, distributed ability to solve comes with the unusual partners. The fact that we have people out there in the community working, they bring along unusual partners. And with unusual partners, UNDP Ag Lab in Latin America works with the Informal Business Association, right? With an experiment. And at the same time, they're also working with Coca-Cola. I mean, it's super interesting. Diverse and interesting how they bring these different voices and unusual partners, and I think that also makes it distributed in a way. I don't know if that answers the question, but
yeah, I think a lot. Can is thanking you for your answer. Great, good. So we are all really intrigued, and we would like to, if there's a link, it would be great to have it. If there's a link to the Accelerator Lab, so that we can all do some more research. And with that, Edu, I would really like to thank you. I would like all participants in the chat, if just they can put one word about how they are feeling about this Accelerator Lab as we leave. And Edu, thank you really a lot. I love the way that you are innovating, and Elaine's point that it's a very different way. I think it's great to see. People are curious to learn more. I think inspiring. I think it would be great to connect people here on the Scaling Up community of practice with whatever is happening in their own neck of the woods with the labs. So thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. I put the link to our website. One unique approach of the labs is the working out loud process. So labs, we're not, they're not working with reports of, they're working out loud. So this means a lot of blogs, a lot of, hopefully podcasts, tweets, exchanging with the world in a very open manner. So in the website, you'll actually find a lot of information coming directly from the labs. And then the other point is that this is a very distributed, decentralized project. So you'll probably, like, close to where you are, I see everyone coming from different parts of the world, you will probably find an accelerator lab. So reach out to them and see what you can do together, right?
Yeah, I think Guillermo's point is very good. He likes the effort, but without financing, impact will be limited. I think that's the next challenge. How do you get the money where the mouth is? Not just your money, but other
In
others
general,
as
indeed,
well.
indeed.
Yeah, very good. Great, good. So thanks to everybody, and see you at the next Community of Practice on Social Entrepreneurship. We will have other exciting presenters, not as exciting as Eduardo, but we will try to manage. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you,
Okay,
everyone.
bye.
It was a
Thank you,
pleasure being here.
everyone. Thank you, Eduardo.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.